Well, today we finally got all the deets of the details, the details of the details of the graphics cards y'all have been waiting to hear about since CES. You know, the one that everyone was briefed on and then during the keynote just decided to say, what graphics cards? What are you talking about? So finally, we have some of the details, not quite all of the details regarding the 9000 series graphics cards coming out from AMD, specifically the 9070 and 9070 XT. So let's see if AMD continues its tradition of never missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Jawa is the #1 online gaming marketplace to buy and sell new and used gaming gear and get awesome custom PCs at amazing prices. Jawa's mission is to be the community where great gaming gear is sold at reasonable prices by putting the market in the hands of gamers by building the best place for you to discuss, buy, and sell your PC gear. Jawa is also proud of their GPU and CPU buying program, where Jawa will make you a direct offer on your used CPUs and GPUs to help immediately offset the cost of your new hardware. Simply click on the Get an Offer button and see an instant offer on your components. Jawa's buyer and seller protection policies ensure safe and reliable transactions, while verified sellers offer an increased buying experience through pre-vetted sellers so you can shop with peace of mind. To get started browsing amazing deals and to see all that Jawa has to offer from enthusiasts just like you, follow the sponsored link in the description below. There's a lot of the press deck that we're just gonna skip and not care about. Like for instance, all the AI performance stuff. We're not AI developers, we don't use AI in any way. That doesn't mean anything to us around here whatsoever. I will tell you this though. This is obviously the RDNA 4 architecture. There's Gen 3 ray tracing cores. They're boasting the increased performance per dollar value. Performance per value. Wow, I'm ready for the weekend. All right, anyway, moving on. I'm not gonna do an architecture deep dive because I'll be honest, I just am not that versed in the engineering side of these GPUs and the dies. I'll tell you what, I'm like most of you where I just care about dollar in and performance out. What does that look like? And I think that's what most people care about. I don't think most people care about how the sausage is made. They just care about the sausage. Okay, so just on a quick note, though, at least regarding the AI accelerators, if you are one of those people that care about that, they're boasting floating point 16, a 2x improvement, integer 8, a 4x improvement, FP16 with sparsity 4x, and integer 8 with sparsity 8x, and floating point 8 formats, new. That's what it says. It says new. So whatever that means. All right, moving on. You know what's funny? They don't have a reference card this time around. I put the last two reference cards up here because they look so good. I've actually loved AMD's design team when it comes to designing these cards. And the renders that we can see right here of what a reference card would have looked like is amazing, but they're not making them. So all of the reviews going forward are going to be third-party cards. So obviously like Sapphire, XFX, Power Color, you know, the usual suspects when it comes to the AMD cards. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Let's go and talk about price real quick. I know that's the thing people are most interested in. And like Steve's video that went up the other day saying, hey, don't screw this up again. It should be don't screw this up, quotes again. So the competitors we have, not even talking about NVIDIA, talking about their own uplift and their own performance and price opportunity here. Compared to the 7900 XTX, it was $999 at launch. The 7900 XT was $899 at launch. And the 7900 GRE, which ended up being a worldwide release, although it was a GPU that was designed specifically for the Chinese market, was $549. Now the 7900 GRE is still one of the most relevant price to performance like propositions that exist. Unfortunately, the GRE is like long gone. Like the GRE Hellhound, amazing card. It was great, actually. It was a SKU that AMD should have just made from the get-go, to be honest. Anyway, when they talk about the slotting of pricing here, they're using the architecture and the core counts and such to justify the pricing. So for instance, at $1,000, they had 96 RDNA 3 CUs, 57.8 billion transistors, $100 less at $900. The 7900 XT had 84 RDNA 3 CUs and 55.8 billion transistors. And then down at the 550 range at the 7900 GRE price, 80 RDNA 3 CUs and 53.8 billion transistors. So you can see right here, and they also show like the resolution that the cards are sort of aimed at. So the 7900 XT and XTX are aimed at 4K gaming, and the 7900 GRE was pointed at 1440p gaming. Although, let's be real, it was very capable of being a 4K gaming card. Now the RX 9070 series, as you can see, slots between both of those 7000 series brackets. So above the 7900 GRE and below the 7900 XT/XTX. And that's because obviously there's two SKUs there. So it shows up to 64 RDNA 4 CUs, that's gonna be for the XT, and up to 53.9 billion transistors. Once again, that's gonna be for the XT. So when it says up to, just know they're referring to the XT. Those are the only two SKUs to deal with here. So in terms of pricing, this is why we are all just holding our breath, wondering what the hell the price is gonna be. And here's the fun fact. They don't know yet, because if they knew, it would be right here on the slide. We know it's gonna be more than $549 and less than $899. That is all we know, because that is where they slotted it on this chart. It's a little odd to me that we are this close to the launch and they have not set the price yet. It doesn't help that leaked like pre-order links and stuff for like Amazon and a couple other websites in Canada showed like pricing that ended up being right around 850 USD. So your guess is as good as mine. Now the problem is, because they're only going to be third-party cards, the price ranges are going to vary greatly depending on the design. You're gonna have your more basic designs, and then you're gonna have your big, beefy, overclocking, quote-unquote designs. I say quote-unquote because the AMD cards, they're interesting when it comes to overclocking, usually just because of the way the architecture works and it's more tilistic design. But we got a huge range here. So if you're just here for the price, I'm sorry, we don't know it either. In fact, the fact that AMD was reaching out to influencers to ask, what do you think the price should be? And any answer other than, as how cheap can you make it, is the wrong answer. So you should never give a dollar amount when a brand asks you, what should we price it at? You should literally always respond, what is the absolute cheapest you can price it at? That's the answer. That's how you go consumer friendly, especially in today's landscape or environment regarding pricing. Okay, so here's the specs that we know. The RX 9070 has 56 compute units versus 64 on the XT. We just saw that in the previous chart. 56 hardware RT accelerators versus 64. 112 AI accelerators, which I guess unless they start really getting leveraged in games, and I guess this would help when it comes to like HyperRX and stuff like that, which is like AMD's kind of version of optimization of upscaling plus AI frame gen. So the more AI accelerators you have, really helps out the HyperRX stuff when it comes to AMD, versus 128 found in the 9070 XT. Now speeds, peak AI tops 1,165 versus 1,557. Boost clocks, big discrepancy in the boost clocks here. 2.52 gigahertz boost on the 9070 versus 2.97 on the 9070 XT. So we are talking about 450 megahertz of clock difference here. That's obviously going to vary by the model though, because every single one of the add-in board partners are going to have their own sauce and formula built into their BIOS. So I'm going to assume they're going to all hit at least these numbers. That's the way I'm looking at it. If they are not hitting at least these numbers, something is wrong. It is a PCIe Gen 5x16 device, but as we've already tested, even with the 5090, it really makes no difference, even all the way down to PCIe Gen 3x16, giving us like 3% to 4% difference when going from Gen 5 to Gen 3. So I wouldn't put too much investment into the idea of it being a PCIe 5 device being all that exciting. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the 9070 first. That might end up being one of the best value propositions in GPUs that we can possibly consider right now. I would assume the performance is targeting right at the RTX 5070, which is why they named it that way. In fact, the one thing they did say back in January was that they named it this so that you had a better performance parity with naming so you can understand where it sort of slots in with NVIDIA. I don't really like that because that sounds too much like you're just following suit rather than trying to be your own entity, if you will. So whatever. Anyway, versus the 6800 XT, now they do a lot of comparison between more than a generation old, like 2 gen stuff old. Same thing when they talk about versus NVIDIA, they're comparing it to like 30 series cards. And I think the reason for that is a lot of people do tend to skip generations whenever they do their updates. So a lot of people, when they upgrade, they don't do a next gen upgrade. They tend to wait a generation and leapfrog. So they're skipping a gen every time. So this would be very relevant because a lot of these cards are going on 5 years plus old, which makes them, well, the performance gains pretty big when you compare previous gen versus previous 2 gens. Anyway, compared to the 6800 XT, which was $100 more than the 9070, it is a 38% uplift in performance across 30 titles, so that's the median, or the mean uplift, versus RTX 3080, which was a $700 card at 4K max settings. It's 26% faster in gaming. Don't forget, this is the 9070, not the XT. So when they compare it to the GRE though, which is a previous gen card, it's 21% faster mean average across 30 titles. Some are gonna have very little uplift, like F124 only had 5%. Assassin's Creed Mirage had 128% or 28% total uplift over the GRE. So depending on the graphics card that you're coming from, I don't know if anyone with a 7900 GRE should necessarily run out and buy this card. Although let's just throw a hypothetical out there. With the way graphics cards are priced today, even the used market, a $550 GRE would bring at least $550 today, mostly because of the fact that you really can't buy them new anymore. They're very difficult to find. So I think if you were to price it at $550, you'd be able to sell it. Now, if you can get your hands on a 9070, that's the other end of the equation. We have heard this from AMD before. And when they said this to me on the phone, my exact response was, don't be so confident. Because their response was, oh, we're gonna have plenty of inventory. We're gonna have plenty. Like we expect plenty of availability on launch day. And my exact response was, don't be so confident. These are different times. I have a feeling that these will still sell out. And you wanna know why? If you live near a Micro Center, just take a trip and look at the GPU aisle. It's rare to see the NVIDIA aisle picked clean and the AMD aisle picked clean. And if anything, NVIDIA, some of the best marketing for AMD right now is all of the NVIDIA crappery that's happening around 50 series. I don't think we've ever had a launch that's pushed people the other direction than we have this time regarding NVIDIA. So that's why we say, don't screw this up, because you literally have been handed a royal flush. But don't be the guy that got dealt a royal flush and you're like, oh, I'm gonna put 2 cards back. Because AMD's done that in the past, more than once. Okay, moving on. Now, obviously we care about the 9070 XT. No idea what that price is gonna be. I still think we're looking at this being in the 700s to potentially, I think my prediction here, if AMD is looking at this as, maybe we make sure we cover our costs. Now, covering your costs is not a good business model. That is not a good business model. You will not be in business long if you only operate to cover your costs. If you can cover your costs this generation and price it to gain some market share, because market share is what gives people confidence to buy something. Yeah, you might not take a bath. We also might not make a lot of profit this time. You're after market share, just like the CPU market with Ryzen back in 2016. And look at how that's gone for them in the last 10 years. Take back market share, make the pricing aggressive. I say $649 is what the 9070 XT should be. And I think $549 is what the 9070 should be to really go after that 7900 GRE replacement. It's also important to note that influencers may or may not have already had these cards for a little while. I can neither confirm nor deny. So it's weird that people are getting the deck after the card. So this is an interesting perspective for some people on seeing this information after having already potentially maybe played with it. So anyway, on their charts moving forward, they're comparing the 9070 XT to the 6900 XT. That's a 51% faster gaming mean average across 30 titles versus RTX 3090, which had a $1,499 MSRP in 4K max settings. It's showing 26% faster than the 3090 across 30 games. Also, the 6900 XT was $1,000. So it is looking, if you're on a 3090 and you paid that kind of price for it, which doesn't feel like that long ago, it kind of sucks when mid-range cards like this, although this is upper mid-range, comes out and just stomps all over your card. That's when FOMO really starts to happen and kick in. Anyway, compared to the 7900 GRE in 4K, looks like we're seeing a range of anywhere between 23% to 48% faster in native 4K. I love they're showing native 4K on here because NVIDIA didn't do a lot of that in the 50 series, which is what gave all the ammunition for the fake frames, fake frames, fake frames. And yes, guess what? AMD has fake frames too. Hello, HyperRX. Anyway, moving on. I love that these charts are in native 4K because this is just showing the generational horsepower uplift. They're not heavily leaning into software uplift. They do that later in the charts. Anyway, and in ray tracing performance versus the 7900 GRE, anywhere between 36% uplift to 66% uplift across the board. That is massive. Anyway, in 1440p, 38% mean average across 30 titles, ranging 23% to 44%, and in RT, 34% to 68%. So it's looking really, really strong. Now we'll talk about the HyperRX stuff real quick because it is something worth noting. There's a lot of people, Phil included, that do turn on frame gen. Depending on the title, depending on how hard it is to run, and depending on the settings, Phil loves the eye candy, and he will turn all that stuff on and move into frame gen to be able to get the FPS to a smooth frame rate. Now, yes, there is input latency. NVIDIA has the NVIDIA Reflex. Obviously, AMD has anti-lag, which is designed to reduce the amount of input latency. Still a lot to be heard about their AMD Fluid Motion Frames 2.1. It just says more coming soon. I assume maybe it's not really ready to be talked about necessarily yet. But HyperRX, as I said, which turns on a suite of features, it's not just a feature like Frame Gen. When you turn on HyperRX, which is a suite of features, including anti-lag and FSR and Frame Gen, you're seeing uplifts of 2.8x, 2.6x, 2.9x specifically in certain titles, which makes a whole lot of sense. There's no mentioning here of quote unquote multi-frame gen. That's a hardware thing found on NVIDIA cards. It's important to also note that HyperRX and frame gen on AMD are done at a driver level, not at a hardware level. So that's how they were able to actually give this level of improvement going all the way back to the 6000 series cards. It's not like, or NVIDIA, they kind of put it behind a paywall where, oh, it's hardware related, so if you are running anything older than certain hardware, you don't get these new features. Now, NVIDIA did actually open DLSS 4 up to all the way back to 20 series, as long as you had tensor cores in your GPU to get these sharper models. Obviously, multi-frame gen, though, was a hardware thing locked behind the Blackwell architecture. So AMD doing on a driver level, though, these improvements we're seeing here actually do go back to the 6000 series cards. Okay, now one thing to talk about here though, when it comes to FS4 or FSR4 though, this is going to be specifically 9000 series, it looks like, because they are utilizing ML powered upscaling. So that is going to be their AI cores that are inside the GPU. So although we don't personally care about AI performance when it comes to like AI workloads, that is utilized in games and such. So this is where I talked about here the upscaler. We talked about the frame gen and all that as being part of HyperRX suite. That is going to be specifically 9000 series GPUs. But anyway, they talk about certain titles here. They're going to be utilizing the upgradable FSR 3.1 API. So there's Ratchet and Clank, you got Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, Space Marine 2, both Horizons actually, Black Ops 6. So they're showing a little demo here in Space Marine where by turning on HyperRX, you went from 53 average FPS in 4K native to 182 FPS in 4K AMD FSR4, so 3.4 times uplift. Again, that kind of stuff only matters to people that want to get the highest frame rates, but also get the best eye candy. Now, although they're not using the same AI modeling that NVIDIA is, obviously that's DLSS. They're showing some pretty solid improvements here in the fidelity. One of the biggest issues with FSR for the longest time was they definitely were more blurry, more smudgy, and they felt very far behind NVIDIA's DLSS models. But now, if you look here, when they show this zoom in of these towers way out in the distance here in Space Marine 2, you can see the comparison between 4K native, FSR 3.1, and FSR 4. And in my opinion, it's very difficult to tell the difference between FSR 4 and native. Now, if you look at the little spires kind of sticking up in the sky, you can see FSR 3.1, they kind of get lost, like they sort of disappear and look like they go dotted. But if FS4, it stays solid. Same thing with the antennas sticking out the side of the building. You can see in 3.1, they have like some smudging. They almost look like they're stretching out. But in FSR 4, they look very tack sharp. Close to native 4K, but still, small objects way out in the distance are going to have some of these artifacts, but the artifacts are improving. So it's nice to see that they're kind of staying on track with improving the modeling. Because the number one reason why people turn off FSR is it just doesn't look great in certain titles out in the distance. Now at launch, they're gonna have 30 titles that are supported, with 75 plus coming throughout the year. I'm only mentioning this for those that care about it. Like I said, we have very differing opinions here in our own office. Like Phil turns all this stuff on, I run native only. So that it's nice to see that that's all gonna be supported. Now because HyperRX is a driver-based technology, there's thousands of games supported here in 2025, but 30 games for FSR4, and then in-game Fidelity FX Super Resolution 2 and 3 have over 400 games supported now. So it's nice to see that happening. Then they move into a lot of features here that personally I'm not that interested in because it's all talking about AI suite and such. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I've seen this movie before and I've seen all the alternate endings. For the love of God, it comes down to the price. It doesn't matter how good it performs if the price is wrong. I don't know what it costs for them to make these cards. I don't. I know times have changed. I know that TSMC is charging way more for their silicon and their wafers than they ever have in the past. I know that TSMC is the largest fab in the world, supporting the most customers out of any manufacturer in the world. I know that TSMC controls a lot of the pricing here. I also know that it's got to make some money or they cannot continue to develop. By them, I mean AMD in this instance. My recommendation, what I think customers would like to see, I don't know what the as low as you can possibly make it is because I don't have the details and know what it costs to make them. But I firmly believe the 9070 should be $549. I think it should be price parity with the 5070. Or if you want to really try to undercut them, maybe $529. Maybe we don't have to do $50 increments. But I personally think anywhere between $599 to $649 for the 9070 XT would be a dramatic impact to what the 5070 and 5070 Ti pricing looks like versus its performance that some of us may or may not have already seen. So for the love of God, AMD, how many opportunities do you have to be given before you get it right? Not many people get this many mulligans. Please, get it on the green. It's a golf reference.